All right. First order of business, even though it won't be up to her standards, I'd like to dedicate this paper to Florence Lister, who loved archaeology, who knew Earl Morris, who advocated for archival research, who inspired probably half the people in this tent, and she would have inspired the other half of you had you been born. So this is for Florence. Hip, hip. I'm here to talk about heaps and heaps of trash, or refuse, they say, archaeological black gold. To be clear, it's hard to do a 15-minute presentation on trash, so we're going to amp it up. So this is going to be a dramatic reenactment. The new updated title of this paper is Refuse, a Paper in 3 Acts. Act 1, in the style of drama, A Tale of Two Walls. Act 2, Garbage, the Tragedy. House ritual explanation spars with the house of functionalism, wherein blood is spilled. And Act 3, comedy, wherein the narrator gets frisky and interpretive, and you all laugh at me. Okay, so I've been teaching at the CU Classics department for a year, so you guys are pretty much lucky this isn't in Latin. Act 1, A Tale of Two Walls. The scene, a low shelf of land overlooking the Adams River, a bluff to the north, blue sky above, some sort of animal makes a noise in the distance. The time, AD 1100, give or take, and also AD 1917, which I'll talk about. The dramatis personae, Aztec West, a massive great house. Earl Morris, intrepid archaeologist. Nels Nelson, better dressed, intrepid archaeologist. Several mounds, elusive and enigmatic. Several photographs, black and white. And gray literature, also black and white. The curtain opens, okay? I borrow from Hamlet. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Indeed, the seen and the unseen in archaeology is something that we grapple with often. Take Aztec. Lovable, furry old Aztec. You all have been there? Most of you are part of it? Great. It's the next best thing to Chaco, settled in the 1090s, built up through the early 1100s, C-shaped, 400 plus rooms, 4 stories, ably protected and interpreted by the National Park Service. When you think of Aztec, you most likely think of Aztec West, where all the tours are, right? But some of you may know about Aztec East, another great house, spitting distance, with a smaller great house north of that, and now thanks to Michelle Turner, we know a lot more about Aztec North on the bluff above. A veritable compound of Chaco-esque great houses. And all this lovely great house architecture is packed cheek by jowl in conjunction with super roads and tri-walled structures, so elegantly, as Van Dyke and others have pointed out, emulating the same layout and patterns of Bonito, Chetro-Kettle, and Alto. But there are more things, Horatio. There are more things that we have not dreamt of. We do know a bit about the mounds, but just a bit. We don't see them anymore, they're mostly gone. When you stand south of Aztec in sort of that shady picnic area, and you look north, the plaza, the great house, the great kiva are all clearly elevated from the ground surface. According to a map from 1940, this was as much as from 10 to 12 feet higher than that surface. Aztec looks like it's on a platform. What demarcates this platform, though? When Lewis Henry Morgan mapped it in 1878, he drew a line the full length of Aztec West. He didn't label it, of course, but he drew it. And 16 years after that, Moore and Moorhead drew the same enigmatic line, also unlabeled. And 24 years after that, in 1916, our friend Earl Morris and Nels Nelson mapped the same line. They made it slightly longer, they moved it a bit, and they marked the line termini on either end with roundish mounds. I probably shouldn't make this gesture. Moorish trenched this line 100 years ago this month in 1917. I did the math for you. In front of the Great House. He called it an aboriginal wall. In his too brief summary, he lamented that a modern irrigation trench and alfalfa farming had sort of destroyed much of what was there. That summer, he also watched, he wasn't allowed to work, when Nelson trenched the mound at the southeast terminus, which was measured as 140 feet by 50 feet by 7. I don't use metric because I'm just used what they did, but you guys get a sense of that. It's bigger than this tent. Nelson and Morris had made a special trip to Chaco actually that summer before, so that in anticipation of this work, and both were disappointed at both sites. Morris by the absence of burials and whole vessels, and Nelson by the seeming absence of stratigraphy and the mixture of the ceramic sequence. He was trying to emulate Kidder at Pecos. We know they were disappointed because they didn't write anything about it. That's how you always know, right? Max helped, but soft photographs were taken. They took pictures. Photos show that Morris later put a trench in the southwest refuse mound, which is under the visitor centers now. The photos clearly show that Morris trenched it twice, very knockily, he didn't have permission, after Norris left the mound. This was 75 feet by 45 feet, and though Morris says it was 7 feet deep, the photographs show it was probably closer to 10. But the walls, this act is about the walls. The long wall in front was built atop at least 4 feet of previously deposited refuse. It stood 2.5 feet wide, 4 feet tall, about the size of this podium, in addition to being some 490 feet in continuous length. It was faced on the south with cobbles that were cut in half, backed with rubble behind it, and there were 2 buttresses, big, huge things, 5 by 10 feet on the south sides, immediately south of, if you extended the wings of Aztec below that. And these buttresses were made of masonry, and Morris believed they held steps that would have helped you ascend up to the top of the mound. Morris excavated the western extent of the wall, traced another wall that turned 90 degrees and would have run, presumably, connected to the southwest corner of the great house. So that's a corner, clear corner. And there's another interesting wall. In 1934, part of the trash mound near the modern parking lot was excavated, and immediately south of that, a robust wall, 3 feet thick, at least 5 feet tall, they didn't actually dig the whole thing, was excavated. It wasn't excavated into sterile sediments. And the wall, whose function wasn't specified by the archaeologists, contained a solid mass of refuse behind it, refuse that likely dated to the Chaco era. And this is just south of where Morris trenched these refuse mounds. He missed it by a couple of feet. So there be walls, and suspiciously so. End of Act 1. Hold that thought. Act 2, garbage, the tragedy. Okay, walls, what is contained in them? We need to know. Probably most of the time it was garbage in one form or another. Here's where we've run into 2 forms of tragedy, the dual. One is one of preservation and recording, and the second is a vocabulary. You know, what's in a name? That which we call a rose by another name would smell as sweet. It would no doubt be as pungent, if nothing else. But we can't seem to agree on a name. As we know it, trash is fickle. And then there's a contingent sort of entity. To each archaeologist, we have different names. Trash, refuse, garbage, waste, debris, detritus, rubbish, discard, dross, offal. So too are refuse mounds, platform mounds, ritual mounds, earthen mounds, platform dance mounds. We're getting better at categorizing this in its many forms, like Schiffer advanced this in lots of ways. Judd and Nelson and Morris and Wills and Wines and Lexons and Walker and Cameron have all had a go at it, and we're getting better. And Rosemary Joyce even took us to greater heights, even though she worked in Mesoamerica. We forgive her. But 4 trenches through the Aztec West mounds have been done, and 3 have been written up, sort of. Each at least 7 feet deep and extended 20 to 50 feet in length. And in all three mounds, they were described as having only Chacoan refuse, presumably in situ secondary refuse. In the southeast mound, which we know the most about, this included black and white, Gallup and Chaco black on white pottery. We know it was 1 bushel, which equals, I had to look it up, 9.5 gallons. They dug by the bushel back then, bless their hearts. This was black on red. There was also 1 quart of coiled ware and 1/2 bushel, again, of more coiled ware. But this would all seem to be Chaco era mixed with the sweepings of house life and a little construction debris. The southeast mound also was revealed to be conical in shape and extended, though it wasn't on the map, 75 additional feet. Again, this is a 140 by 55 foot mound. It went an additional 75 feet to the east, towards Aztec East, and it possibly even merged with Aztec East's refuse mound. So it's described by both Morris and Nelson as the major deposit, but it is drawn much smaller on the maps. Photos sort of rectify and dispute this. The southwest mound, on the other hand, excavated by the permissionless Morris, was also chock full only of Chacoan pottery. This, though, with distinct layers of coarse charcoal and with a number of rock-walled fire pits contained within. The area behind the 490-foot wall towards the great house itself is enigmatic. Morris's map is actually incomplete. The one section that he was supposed to label as the refuse is left out blank, so it goes A, B, C, E, F, G. It's very faint. Anyway, it's unfortunate. But more than half of the enclosing wall room, the rooms that close off the sort of the southern extent of the Chaco and Great House, more than half are filled or built atop Chaco and refuse alone. And more on this in a bit. A final trash tale. Up until 1960, there was still a small refuse mound in the lawn in front of the visitor centers, the last of its kind. From photos, this seems to be an offshoot of the southwest Chaco mound that Morris trenched. It's unclear why this 30-foot by 5-foot tall mound was spared. When it was excavated, it had significant Mesa Verde and Miguelmo pottery on top. This is later. And small amounts of Gallup Cortez and Chaco black on white at the bottom, with an articulated dog leg to indicate a relative absence of disturbance. Apologies to Pooch in the audience. And it was likely, or at least interpreted as being an additional mound that was built atop and sort of overflowed that wall that we just talked about, that 5-foot sort of super robust wall. So we have weird walls, we have refuse. What can we make of this? So we move to the final act, the comedy, because this is where I get my reach exceeds my grasp, and I realize that, but what else are you going to do, right? So, though this be madness, yet there is method to it, or so I think. Even with this limited new evidence, there is one interesting argument that we could possibly, potentially address with this new data. Does Aztec have a terrace, which is a really safe bet? Or could it possibly have a Bonito-esque platform mound in front of it? A terrace is what most people, including Morris, think. A terrace modifies the landscape to create a flat surface from a slope, essentially a la Cameron, a construction pad that levels and elevates a great house foundation. Terraces are also found at Chetroketo, Alto, and outside the canyon at Kinhachoy, Porter, Farview, and Bluff. But for jollies, let's play out the alternative. The tantalizing hypothesis that the refuse-containing walls of Aztec are more than just a retaining wall and function more than just a terrace. The answer may lie in the aggregated data from the court and southern enclosing walls of Aztec. There are clear indicators of an earlier occupation, but its trash has yet to be assessed. Morris attested this sort of both directly and indirectly, that with earlier structures and the like, but when he did subfloor excavations, not systematically, they often hit more and earlier refuse. The enclosing walls to the south could also be a little bit later than we anticipated. There are no datable tree rings from it, although they're assumed to have been constructed from the same age as the east wing construction. But even if they're a tiny bit later than we thought, the wings of Aztec are much stubbier and much shorter than they appear on the map or when you visit today. And they're actually almost perfectly symmetrical, with the hearth of the Great Kiva making a midline across them in perfect symmetry. If that is the case, they leave a tiny bit of more room for a constructed, enclosed mound to the south, one with very similar dimensions, 490 feet by 75 feet, or a little bit more, as those of Bonito, which are 390 feet by 90 feet, with walls that form at least one corner angle, which hints at a sort of rectangular function, and which are built atop fill, and which contain further accumulated refuse that includes at least one surface, rock line hearth, construction fill, occupation fill, and evidence of mass deposition. The evidence of an earlier arroyo to the east and its infilling by trash, and the presence of farmed fields of corn to the south may also indicate that big long wall may have acted as a control feature. And these are amazing parallels, tantalizing parallels with the mounds found at Bonito. More work needs doing. But the possibility of a more complex internal mound architecture, something which Chip Wills has argued is only demonstrated at Bonito, and the parallels of location, dimension, form, provide sort of an intriguing possibility, I think, that both adds another notch in the belt of Aztec emulation of Bonito architecture, and I think speaks to the tantalizing prospect that the mounds at Aztec were more than a terrace, and was planned architectural construction function with possible ritual space. But perhaps this is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury and signifying nothing, but the idiot would be happy to show you some photos at lunch if you have time. Thank you all.